How's it going? Ed here. Today's tutorial we're going to focus on stereo widening and ideas for how to get sounds a bit bigger in the stereo field. Here's an example. I've got some beats here recorded off my OP1 synth. They're played in real time and I've left them unquantized. I quite like that sound. More to that later. Let's have a listen. They sound pretty cool. They layer in nicely with a second lot of battery beats. Let's add that in, just a simple kick and snare. If I stop that one and just play kick and snare. Simple 4 crotchet pattern. Let's add the other one. So you get the idea. Now, they sound good together, but they're both mono. How can we get it to be a bit wider in the stereo field? So I'm going to choose this one. Let's stop the battery beat for a sec. And I want it to be a much wider stereo image, so it sounds better on headphones and just sounds generally bigger. I'm going to use a delay. So whether you're in Logic, Ableton, Pro Tools, whatever, it doesn't matter. You've still got delays. So let's grab a delay, just a bog standard one. I'm in Ableton 10, so they've updated their delay to look a little bit like this, but this is the old stereo delay, ping pong delay combined. We're going to work on very short delay times, so I don't want this to sound like an echo. At the moment it would be a repeating echo sort of effect. On beats that just gets really complicated very quickly. Doesn't work so well. So I'm going to take it off sync. And I'm also going to unlock these. Just turn the right hand side off. Now you can see we've got individual delay times for the left and right. Let's choose very short delay times. So generally needs to be more than 10 milliseconds for our ears to pick up on it being a delay. I'm going to make, and it's fairly arbitrary the amount you set. Just have a listen and it kind of, there'll be a sweet spot depending on what BPM and how wide you want the image to be. Let's start off with them both maybe at 15 milliseconds and no feedback. And I'm going to leave a 50-50 balance of dry-wet. You can hear it's just it almost sounds like latency on a computer. Doesn't sound very wide. What we need to do is have different delay times for the left and right. So let's take it off link. And yeah, 15 and 24, let's try that. If you're wearing headphones, you should hear now it's way wider, sounds much better. If I go 100% wet, you can hear the width of that. Now, one thing to point out is that sometimes when using tricks like this, sometimes the low frequencies can be cancelled out when you mono it. As an example, let's get utility up and just make it mono. Have a listen to the low end if I leave it dry and wet there, and we'll just try different delay times and you might hear it start to cancel out bass. If I notice that, take the delay off. Even though the filter has no effect, let's change the delay time on one of them. Notice suddenly the bass comes back. That's because when these two channels are being summed together in mono, if the two low frequency waves arrive at opposite ends of their cycle, the peaks and the trough, a sine wave has a positive and a negative side to it, then if they arrive exactly the opposite to each other, mirror images, they'll cancel each other out. And it generally happens to lower frequencies more than higher frequencies. I mean, it happens across the board, but it's most noticeable with low frequencies. So what we might want to do to stop us potentially losing the bass if we mono it, this might be relevant if you're making stuff that's being played in a club, because often a club sound system will, and any PA system tends to mono the bass to go to the subs. They don't tend to be in stereo, which means, of course, if it's being summed to mono, suddenly you lose all your sub bass. Let's use the filter built into the delay, and let's high pass it. I'm going to get rid of the mono thing, and let's just bring that back to where it was, 24. Let's bring up the filter by grabbing that, so that the delay is, the low frequencies of the delay are being filtered out. You can that's pretty good there. You can, if you want, make it much thinner and have just a small mid-range, so it only really affects the snare. I quite like the top end though. Let's try that. So let's bring it back, the dry-wet balance again. A/B it. Sounds good. Let's try monoing it, and just to check, so with it monoed, bass is still there, that's good. Stereo. Great. So I can get rid of that now, it was just to check. It's a trick that you can use on anything. So that was that beat. I've got a sort of a gnarly bass line here. So let's just solo the bass. This is an analog modular synth, so it's audio, there's no controls once you've recorded it in. So how can we make this wider? Well, we can use the same technique. If you're a massive user, then there's a preset that a lot of people use, that dimension expander. Essentially, it's exactly the same thing. It's just a very short stereo delay. So let's put the delay on it. Again, as always, turn off the sync and make it quite short. Let's make one side 15, and I don't know, we could go a bit longer maybe. 24 and 45. As I say, just try dialing them around and seeing what works. It has to be generally in somewhere in the range more than 10 milliseconds and probably less than 100 milliseconds to really get that effect, so it doesn't sound like a delay. Turn feedback to 0, and let's use the filter, because I don't want to filter for the same reason as before. I don't want to potentially lose any of my sub if it does get monoed in a club, so I'm just going to bring the filter of that delay up a little bit. If you want to hear the filter, chuck it over to 100% wet to see. That's probably good. Maybe a bit lower. That's not bad. So put it back somewhere around 30%. I'm going to fiddle around with the delay times. It's not quite how I want it yet. Notice as I change, we get a shift in the tone. It's comb filtering. It's the exact same thing as was happening before. You just have to tweak it until it sounds like it should. That's sounding good. I like that, that sounds great. And let's try it with the beat and everything else. Sounds great. If we take those little stereo things off, you can hear it makes such a big difference. Let's just delete not delete them, disable them. Very mono. That snare sounds great now with that stereo delay. It's a simple trick, but it really works on snare drums, claps, bass lines. Great. There's another thing I wanted to look at is this sound here. Let's stop all clips. If I take these off, again, this is kind of enhancement of a sound. Sounds, I mean, it's kind of nice, but it sounds like it needs more. So first hit the reverse button, and I'm a big fan of using these little buttons, the ×2, to increase the segment BPM, so it has a time stretching effect. You can sort of hear it, and if we go all the way, 352. The algorithm, we're using the Beats algorithm, it's slicing it at each transient and then kind of doing a backwards and forwards motion. And you get those sort of glitches. You can play around with these, they're really powerful. If you change it and maybe choose, I don't know, eighth notes and perhaps only go forwards. And if I bring this 100% down, this is a bit like an envelope. It's the decay of an envelope. And of course we can make it 16ths as well. You can get some great noises out of it. Really fun to play around with these. Originally, so I had it transients, it was backwards and forwards and 100 kind of no decay. And I was using some of my favourite plugins in Ableton. Filtered delay. Let's just solo that so we're focused on it. Filtered delay does a very similar thing to what we were just doing. It's panned off different delays. Each delay is filtered. It has its own filter graph here that you can change. It's got individual feedbacks, individual pans and individual volumes, and it gives you really nice stereo images. So that goes first. Then this saturator. The default setting for saturator is analog clip, which is just a general distortion. But I don't know if you've ever looked through the other curves. There's this sinoid fold, which is quite interesting. This is a wave folder, and rather than clipping the waveform when it gets to the zero crossing point, it folds the waveform back down again, so you get extra harmonics. It's a weird sound. Let me turn it on and you can hear. Kind of this modulated sound. If I put it to clip, analog clip is kind of normal, just get a bit of fuzzy clipping, but sinoid fold is amazing. So yeah, a favourite there. The other thing I've got to give it a bit of rhythm, I'm just using a sidechain compressor from I think Battery. Let's just check. From Battery, yeah. And that's just giving us kind kind of quarter note pumping thing. So some of my favourite little techniques in there. Notice I'm on the what's it called? Session view, the grid in Ableton. I tend to like working on this when I'm working on a song, working on individual loops, and then arranging them using the master track, kind of arranging them into, okay, I'll have these few playing at that point, and that'll be like a break, there'll be a verse, gnarly bit, peak of the bass, and then I tend to do a recording pass where I just play it live, so hitting record and then triggering each one of the scenes, maybe starting off with the quiet bit. What's the first one? Oh yeah, it's just that sound on its own. And then perhaps bring in then the drums. And each section gradually builds up until we mainly get to the main verse. Maybe go into a breakdown. Stop the bass. Play around with ideas and then record it in live using the little recorder there. If I press tab to jump over it, and then it creates my layout, and then I'll sort of fine tune it later. It's a great way to get a really sort of live feeling arrangement. So hopefully that's useful. We're focusing on stereo image using the delay and very short delay times, often no feedback. Think about this filter. Getting rid of the low end can help avoid any potential low-end phase cancellation problems where suddenly all your sub disappears. And then finally we just looked at the saturator, and the Synoid fold is a really cool little effect. Yeah, hopefully some techniques there you might not have used before, or maybe being used in a different way than you might do already. Give me a shout if you want to look at any techniques, and I can make videos about it. All right, cheers, bye.